as follows. After my opening remarks, we will listen to our guest speaker, Mrs. Denise McKenzie. Then I will introduce Ms. Valerie Ludovico, who will explain some details involved in the folders. And then I will invite our pastor, Father Mike Gerlach, to give his blessing to conclude the time. For those who are watching from their homes, we welcome you and we say a special thank you to Marty Harris, who was responsible for the hours and hours of work that are involved in getting cameras and sound coordinated. So as I mentioned before, we have Robert Francis Stewart here for easy access for purchasing of religious articles. We also are blessed to have our volunteer teachers and our Catholic school teachers that are here working together for the sacraments of reconciliation and First Eucharist, as well as confirmation. And on behalf of our principal, Sister Regina Olenich, and myself, we thank those teachers because they do over and above what is the norm. So, again, God gave us a glorious day. Obviously, the family is here. Obviously, the faith is here. And for the fun part, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So, to begin, as those who know me know that I like to decorate. So I like to look at color. I also make sure that colors are coordinated. Obviously, blue is one of my favorite colors. And also the fact that in the church, you know that the colors mean something. So in our church right now, it's ordinary time. So you saw Father wear green. And green is, again, to say we're ordinarily counting the numbers of the weeks in the church. But my most favorite season of the church is Advent. Advent time in December. And I know that when I was a very, very young sister, I asked Sister Maria Corday, who was a wonderful, terrific sewer, I said to Sister, I could use some nice purple cloths. And she said, oh, okay, well, I'll make them for you. So as a result, I have these beautiful, nice purple cloths that Sister made, and they're one of my treasures. And you might say, well, Sister, you've had them for a long time. Yes, I've had them for a very long time. In fact, I've used them for every Advent and from every penance that I've been involved in, and they serve as a reminder of Sister Maria Corday. Sister Maria Corday and I were missioned together at St. Alice School in Upper Darby. And a lot of people ask the sisters to pray. Well, Sister Maria Corday asked all the sisters to pray, and she talked about her grandniece, Bernadette McKenzie. And she talked about how Bernadette was struggling and all the pain was prayed for Bernadette. I also listened and had compassion for Bernadette McKenzie, who was this young person I never ever met. Sister Maria Corday talked about this campaign that everybody together was going to pray. Everybody was going to get on board and pray. So this campaign was for a healing miracle for Bernadette. So I listened and again felt compassion in my doubt in my head. I thought to myself, she's asking for a miracle? So this is not really going to take place. You know, how can I and the sisters pray for a miracle? Miracle only happens like in the movies, or, you know, St. John Newman down in Philadelphia and things like that. So you might say, well, people were calling you Doubting Thomas, sister. Yes, I was a doubter. I was a Doubting Thomas. And I just shrugged it off. And I said, well, it's never going to happen. Here I am, years and years later. And so I have to promote this story, because I thought it was impossible Thought it was impossible, but as we know, what? Nothing is impossible with God. And so our guest speaker, Denise McKenzie, is here today with her husband, Michael. She met Mike in high school and has been married for 46 years. Can we have a round of applause? 46 years married to the same person. They met together in high school. The mother and father of 5 children, 3 sons, Michael, Daniel, and Jimmy, and 2 daughters, Bernadette and Maureen. Denise is the grandmother of 13 grandchildren, ranging in ages from 19 to 2 years old, 7 girls and 6 boys. She's a graduate of the best high school in the world, Archbishop Prendergast High School for girls. Let's hear it. She also went to Newman University and has a degree in liberal arts. She taught for 34 years for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. 34 years. Sister Regina, pretty long time, right? Mm-hmm. And also she was a master teacher for the Archdiocese in the new teacher program. While she was teaching 34 years for the Archdiocese, 29 of them were in St. Lawrence and Upper Darby. Another round of applause for St. Lawrence and Upper Darby. That was the high school, that was the parish we moved to when my family moved out of Philadelphia. Denise also developed and coached an award-winning competitive forensics team and helped to create the drama club at St. Lawrence, where she served as the technical director and then director of the school shows. Denise was a member of St. Bernadette's Parish in Drexel Hill, where her family was introduced to the Oblate Sisters of St. Francis de Sales, who became known as St. Leone Aviat. Denise retired from teaching in June 2018 and presently is working part-time at Monsignor Bonner and Archbishop Prendergast High School. She's working as the assistant there at the admissions office. Also, Denise's sister lives here in our parish, Helene O'Terry. Some of you might know Helene O'Terry, and also her husband is Dominic O'Terry. Again, they're both involved in the medical field. Denise's other sister is an IHM sister, Sister Marianne Evans, who could not be with us today, but we were hoping that maybe she could. But we are so blessed and very, very honored today to have with us today Mrs. Denise McKenzie. Please welcome her.
I'm muted now. Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Okay, well, it is my honor to be here today to speak to you about exactly what Sister introduced, and that was that our family was very blessed to have a miracle that was recognized by Rome happen to our daughter. Now, it's been since 1992 since her miracle occurred. It was approved in the year 2000 by now St. Pope John Paul II, and then in 2001, our family traveled to Rome for the canonization of now St. Leone Aviat, who was the person we prayed to for our daughter's miracle. So before I begin the story, there are 3 words I would like you all to keep in mind. One is prayer, One is faith, and the other is miracle. Anybody, mom, dad, child, what do you think the word prayer means, or what does prayer mean to you? You can raise your hand. I have a prize for you if you answer. What do you think prayer is? How many of you say your prayers? How many of you pray? Okay, good. All right, so most of us probably believe that prayer is when we say our ritual prayers, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Glory Be, the prayers at church. And they are. They're our anchor. When I taught school, I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. I taught 6th grade for about 10 years. I taught 7th grade for a while. They kept promoting me. I guess they thought I was smart enough to be promoted. Before I retired, I taught 8th grade for about 8 years. And when I taught about prayer, I would always say to my classes, yes, you need your ritual prayers. Yes, we prayed every morning in the classroom. We prayed at lunchtime. We prayed before classes. We prayed at the end of the day. But to me, prayer was just having a conversation with God. And that's exactly, even to this day, what prayer is to me. Before I go to bed at night, thanking Him for the day I had, good or bad. In the morning, thanking Him that I woke up in the morning, okay? Throughout the day, when thinking about my children or my grandchildren or things that were going on in my job, just a little conversation in my mind. And that's what prayer was to me. So, prayer is important in this story. Faith. Interesting that Sister Barbara talked about being the doubting Thomas, because no one was more of a doubting Thomas when it came to praying for a miracle than me. Our daughter took sick when she was in 7th grade. She came one day and complained about a pain in her back. When I was 18, I had back surgery. I was born with what was called a pineal sinus. She was born with a pineal sinus. So, when she complained about the pain in her back, I said to her, it's probably your pineal sinus. Let's go to the doctors. So to the doctors we went. The doctor agreed, it's probably just her pineal sinus. I'm going to send you to a surgeon. So we went to the surgeon, and the surgeon examined her and came out and said, I think there's more here than the pineal sinus. I think her spine's involved, and I'd like an MRI. Now, all those years ago, it was not common to have an MRI center. We had to go to Langhorne, Pennsylvania for her MRI. And 5 days later, the doctor called to tell me that she had a condition called tethered cord syndrome and that she needed to go see a neurosurgeon. And what tethered cord syndrome is that you and I, if your spine is formed correctly, as we grow, your spine's flexible, and as you grow, your spine can accommodate your growth. If you have tethered cord syndrome, your spine is tied down to the base of your back. And as you grow, your spine stretches. And all of those nerve endings that are at the bottom of your spine begin to stretch with it. And that begins to cause not only pain, but debilitation. So we ended up going down to Thomas Jefferson University, and we saw a Dr. Bruce Northrup, that the spine would ease, her pain would go away, and that she probably would be okay. But if she began to develop certain symptoms, then I needed to call him, because then he believed surgery would be necessary. Those symptoms were, particularly if she began to experience any numbness of her lower extremities. And about 3 weeks after our initial visit to Dr. Northrup, sure enough, she woke up one Saturday and she was having pins and needles in her legs. So on Monday, I called Dr. Northrup, and Bernadette was placed in the hospital the next day, and he was going to operate. And he told my husband and I that the surgery was going to be rather simple. He was going to make a little incision at the base of her spine. He was going to unsnip all of the tethers that were tying her spine down. That would release her spine. She should be okay. She'll probably be in the hospital about 3 or 4 days. Surgery would be about 4 hours. He thought that was going to cure the problem. Well, surgery ended up being 9.5 hours. And instead of that little incision at the base of her spine, she was cut from the top of her back all the way down. She ended up in intensive care, pediatric intensive care, for a week. She had one of those steel halos around her head because she was not allowed to move at all. When the doctor came out of the operation and he met with my husband and I, he told us that he was reasonably sure that she was paralyzed, and he was reasonably sure that she also was incontinent. And he was reasonably sure that that was going to be the end of it. That because of all of the tethers, he was reasonably sure that he had nicked or cut some of her nerve endings. Thankfully, they discovered within the next day or two that she was not paralyzed. The whole jury on the incontinence was still out. She spent a week in intensive care, and then they moved her to a regular room where she ended up being for the next 3 weeks. She slowly recovered from that surgery, was allowed home. She wasn't allowed to do anything. Now, those of you who are in 6th and 7th grade, can you imagine being told that you're not allowed to do anything? She wasn't allowed to really hang out with her friends. Our family owns a home at the Jersey Shore, where we spend our summers. In fact, that's where Mr. Mackenzie and I came from this morning. She was not allowed in the water. She was allowed to walk the boardwalk. She was not allowed on any amusements. She was allowed to sit in the sand. That was pretty much it. She never finished 7th grade. But I don't know if are you guys in school yet or not, or are you all virtual? There was a time back in 1990, if you told a 7th grader that you were going to miss school, they were thrilled to death. Yes, I don't have to go to school. Bernadette was very excited that she didn't have to go to school. She was very excited at all the attention that she got until about the 3rd week in the hospital. And then she was tired of it. Then she was even more tired of it, and she wasn't allowed to do anything. So now it's time for 8th grade. She was allowed back in school for 8th grade, very cautiously. And about a month into 8th grade, she started to complain about the pain in her back. And we were observing that it was becoming more and more difficult for her to walk. Each step was painful. So back to the doctors we went, back to the neurosurgeon, and he ordered another MRI. And the MRI showed that her spine had retethered. The tethers had grown back, and of course her spine was once again tethered to the base, and that's where the pain was coming from. But Dr. Northrup was reluctant to operate on her again because she had just had surgery in May. So instead, he pulled her out of school and he confined her to bed. The only thing she was allowed to do was get up and use the bathroom, and she was allowed up and down the steps once a day, because every time you took a step on the step, you were pulling on her spine, causing more damage. This was her 8th grade year. A lot of things happened in 8th grade. She was devastated. that now here she was once again out of school. January came and Dr. Northrup brought her back for an examination. He ordered another MRI, he ordered a couple ultrasounds, and he decided that he was going to operate on her again. And so in January of 1991, she had her second spinal surgery, very much like the first, except that she was only in the operating room for 6.5 hours instead of 9.5. She ended up in regular neurosurgical intensive care, where she was for about a week and a half. When she was moved to a regular room and she was finally allowed out of bed, they discovered that she now had some effects from this surgery. She couldn't lift her left leg, and she indeed was incontinent. And for those kids here who don't know what that means, you know when you have to go to the bathroom, right? Sometimes we have to rush to the bathroom. She never knew when it was time to go because she couldn't feel that. So they eventually discharged her, and thankfully the incontinence did go away, but she couldn't still lift her left leg. So the doctor ordered physical therapy, and finally, around the middle of April, she was allowed back to school, only half day, but she was allowed back so she at least could finish out her year and possibly experience all of the end of the year things that happen for 8th graders, like your 8th grade graduation exercises, your 8th grade dance, etc. The physical therapy helped with her leg, and she was thrilled to be back in school, to be back with her friends. She didn't have to worry too much about her classes because I guess, unfortunately for her, she had a mother for a teacher, so I always made sure that she had all of her schoolwork done. So now, she's graduated from 8th grade. She is feeling good, probably the best recovery she had compared to the first surgery. We were very confident, the doctor was confident that this was the end of the road for her, that everything had worked, the surgery finally did what they wanted it to do, the physical therapy was working, she was no longer dragging her left leg. One of the things when we moved to St. Bernadette's Parish and we were introduced to the Oblate Sisters of St. Francis de Sales, we found out that they sponsor a camp for girls every summer. Their mother house in the United States is in a place called Childs, Maryland, right outside of Elkton. And so when we moved, Bernadette was in 6th grade and our daughter Maureen was in 3rd, and they had gone to camp the first year that we were in the parish. The second year our daughter Maureen went, Bernadette was not allowed because of her back issue. So now she's graduated from 8th grade, she can be a camp counselor, she was very excited, she couldn't wait to go back to camp. She was able to have a quote-unquote normal summer, still not allowed on amusements, still not allowed in the water, but she was allowed to do more things than she had been allowed to do after her first surgery. Her most exciting thing was going to this camp. She came home from camp. She pretty much did what other kids do. She was very excited about being in high school. 4 of our 5 children our boys went to Bonner, our girls went to Prendy. Our 5th child is deaf, and so he always went to a school for the deaf. But we are all proud graduates of Bonner, Prendy, and she could not wait to go to Prendy. She could not wait. She was so excited about going to high school. And along about 2 weeks before it was time for school to begin, I noticed that her leg was going into spasms. And I also noticed that she was dragging now her right leg. And one day, just how you brush against somebody, I brushed against her and she jumped. And I said to her, Bernadette, what's wrong? Nothing. Yeah, there's something wrong because you jumped. When I brushed, I didn't hit her back, I brushed against it. And then she admitted that the pain had returned in her back, that yes, it was difficult to walk up and down the steps, but she didn't care because she wanted to go to high school. And please, 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 you cannot tell anybody, and no, I don't want to go back to the doctors. So, against my better judgment, I said, okay, we'll see how it goes. Now, I don't know if anybody here knows what the Prendy building is like, but Archbishop Prendergast High School is an old, very large building that had lots and lots of steps. It did have an elevator. The elevator was broken. So my concern was she was going to have to go up and down these steps a lot. She did. But along about mid-September, she came to me one night and said, "You have to call the doctor. I really can't take the pain anymore." And as her family, we were noticing that she was walking slower and slower. So I called Dr. Northrup. He saw Bernadette. He ordered another MRI. She had the MRI. We went back for the results, and the results showed that her spine had retethered for a third time. And so the option was surgery. However, Dr. Northrup was going on a medical conference in China. And he said, "I don't want to operate on her and leave her with anybody else. So I'm going to pull her out of school, and I'm sending you to a pain specialist, and maybe he can come up with something to help her deal with the pain." She obviously couldn't go on pain medication because that's a narcotic. Bernadette was devastated that she had to leave school because back in the heyday, when you had a birthday in school, everybody, all your friends decorated your locker. She could not wait to have her locker decorated. Her birthday was October 21st. We went to see the pain specialist October 6th, and he examined her, and he listened to the whole story, and then he asked what the school building was like, and I told him it was this massive building, which at one time was the Drexel Estate, had many, many steps, and yes, it did have an elevator that was broken. And so the pain specialist immediately pulled her out of school, confined her to bed, and said, "We'll wait and see what Dr. Northrup says when he comes back." Bernadette was devastated. Part of the issue is dealing with a 7th grade, 8th grade, and now 9th grade young lady whose future is looking bleaker and bleaker. She was just beyond upset. Not so much that she was missing school, but that she wouldn't be there to have her locker decorated. She didn't care about the schoolwork. She wouldn't have her locker decorated. Nothing we could do about it. Dr. Northrup returned in early November, examined her again, looked at her MRIs again, and then he scheduled surgery for November 13th. So on November 13th, Bernadette went in for her 3rd surgery. When Dr. Northrup met with my husband and I, he said, "I'm not going to do the big laminectomy. I'm just going to do that little incision that I was going to do the first time. And then she'll be in probably 2 or 3 days, and then you'll be able to take her home. And surgery will probably be 2 to 3 hours." 10.5 hours later, Bernadette was still in surgery. And when he came out, he put her immediately into neurosurgery intensive care. And she had all kinds of drains and all kinds of things coming out of her back. Because one of the issues that happened with her first surgery, and then happened with her second, and it happened with her third, was that because her spinal cord was stretched so much, your spinal cord, my spinal cord, her spinal cord all has a lining, a sheath over it. Dr. Northrup warned us before her first surgery that he was concerned that she might have tears in her spinal cord lining. And if that happens, then you have a leakage of spinal fluid. After her first surgery, or during her first surgery, it was discovered that the lining to her spinal cord was in shreds from her spine being stretched so much. So he had repaired it, and he repaired it the second time. And the third time, because he was so concerned about the leakage of spinal fluid, she had all kinds of drains coming out of her back. She was in the hospital about 2.5 weeks. We actually brought her home on Thanksgiving Day. And as she did with all her other surgeries, she took her time getting back into her routine, except that she never got back into her routine because the pain almost came back immediately. And when she first started to complain about the pain in her back again, he said to her, "Bernadette, you just had a third surgery. It's probably just surgical pain." She said, "Mom, I know the difference. I know the difference between the pain in my back and my surgical pain." So, phone call to Dr. Northrup again, and he confined her to bed. She wasn't even allowed up and down the steps. She was confined to bed. He ordered a back brace for her, special back brace. He thought maybe that would help. Christmas happened, New Year's happened, January happened. By mid-February, she was getting very antsy. She really wanted to go back to school. She didn't care about the pain in her back. She just wanted to have some normalcy in her life. So back to Dr. Northrup we went, and he allowed her to go to school for a half a day. By then, by the way, the elevator was fixed. And so she went to school for half a day. But I have to tell you, when I would pick her up, or my husband would pick her up, by 11:30, she had had it. She was ready to go right to bed and stay there. She took most of her meals in her bedroom. She really could not function around the house because it was just too painful. Every step was excruciatingly painful. By March, she had worsened considerably. In fact, my neighbor said to me, "Oh my word, Bernadette looks like she's 90 years old," because she was hunched over, she couldn't stand up straight. Every step was really a labor for her because the pain was so bad. One of the things that my husband and I and all of our children, including our son who is deaf, have always been involved in is theater. So you heard Sister say that when I was at St. Lawrence's, I was technical director of their shows and then eventually director of their shows. My husband has been technical director of Bonner and Prendy's shows since he graduated in 1970, and he's still doing that today. Plus, he is moderator of their stage crew. When our sons and daughters went through Bonner Prendy, they were all part of stage crew or part of being in the show. Bernadette wanted desperately to be in the show. So we kind of made a deal with the director. Could she at least have like a walk-on with the chorus, which when she was able, which was probably like 3 times, she would put on a costume, be at the last part on stage, but at least she was in the show. So now it's the last night of the show. It's a Sunday. I woke her up to see how she was feeling. She was crying. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "You have to call the doctor." She said, "I really, really, really can't take this pain anymore. And I don't care if he wants to operate again. I just can't take the pain." When I tell you, Bernadette hated the hospital. She hated going to the doctors. So I knew if she was asking me to call the doctor and to have him schedule another surgery, then things must have been bad. So, call the doctor. We had an appointment for St. Patrick's Day. So down we go, and he examined Bernadette, And then he asked Bernadette to leave the room. And on the way down, Bernadette and I were speaking about like when she possibly could have the surgery. I was a teacher, I would be off at Easter time. She wouldn't be missing that much school if she was off at Easter time. So we had this grand plan for her third surgery. So after Bernadette left the room, I said to Dr. Northrup, I explained the whole plan to him. And he said to me, Mrs. McKenzie, there will not be another surgery. I went, really? Why? And he said, because when I began treating Bernadette, I knew that her case was going to be difficult. I had no idea it was going to be this difficult. He said, there is nothing more we can do for her. We have done everything we can. I don't know. I went, really? So, like, what does that mean? And he said, it means that within a month or two, she'll be in a wheelchair. I went, okay. And then? And he said, and then by the end of the year, she'll be bedridden. And I said, and then? And he said, she'll be bedridden the rest of her life because there is nothing more out there for us to do for her. I guess it took me a little bit of time to process that he was telling me that our 14-year-old daughter was going to be bedridden the rest of her life. She would never get to go back to high school. She'd never go to a prom. She'd never have fun. She'd never go to college. She'd never marry. She'd never have children. So all of those things were going through my mind, but the biggest thing going through my mind was I had to now go tell that 14-year-old girl that this is what the doctor said. Now, he also wanted us to go see another specialist. But he said to me, I've already consulted with Dr. So-and-so the whole time I've been treating Bernadette. He knows what I've been doing. But maybe if he physically sees her, maybe he'll come up with something different. And so he said to me, here's his number, call and make an appointment. So we got into the car, and Bernadette said, okay, so when is my surgery? And I said, Bernadette, there isn't going to be a surgery. And she said, why? You cannot lie to a 14-year-old. And so I told her exactly what the doctor said. And she didn't say anything for a while. And then she said, frankly, I'd rather be dead. And I said, no, you wouldn't, Bernadette. She said, yes, I would. And then she went through all the things that she would never be able to do if she was bedridden the rest of her life. Of course, she cried all the way home. I probably cried, not outwardly, but inwardly all the way home. We came home. We told the rest of the family the news. It was devastating. Now, the whole time that Bernadette was sick, some of the people who were most influential in our lives were the Oblate Sisters of St. Francis de Sales, the sisters who staffed St. Bernadette's School. They visited Bernadette often when she was in the hospital. They visited her often when she was home and she was not allowed in school. In fact, because God has a sense of humor, when all of this was happening with Bernadette, our youngest son, who was born deaf, was also born with 5 missing toes and a missing finger. And while Bernadette was in Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia, he was at DuPont Hospital in Wilmington, Delaware, having reconstructive surgery. So my husband would go to Jefferson, I would go to DuPont because they needed an interpreter for him, and then we would switch off. So we were kind of going between Wilmington, Delaware, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and then because life was not interesting enough In January of 1992, my husband fell, crushed his wrist, broke 17 bones in his wrist, had to have surgery, and was incapacitated for a good 2 months. And so because, not for anything, it's okay to have a cross or two, but God was getting a little bit overbearing. So the night of his surgery, after the doctor told me he would never work again and that we would be bankrupt before he would ever be able to work again, in my car in the Delaware County Memorial Hospital parking lot, I had a meltdown. It really wasn't a meltdown, I had a temper tantrum. And my temper tantrum was with God. And I said to him, I have had enough. I do not mind you sending me a cross or 2 or 3, but I certainly do not want the lumber yard. So would you please spread your crosses around? Because I'm not sure I can take another cross to bear. That was my first prayer towards Bernadette's miracle, although I didn't know it at the time. Back to the Oblate Sisters, one of the things they did while he was recovering is if I had to go out, sometimes I drove him to a job and he would show me what to do. The Oblate Sisters would come over, make dinner, do homework with our kids, and put them to bed. Let me tell you how glad the rest of my kids were that the principal of their school was in their house putting them to bed. That did not go over well. Anyway, we became very close to the Oblate Sisters. Bernadette became very, very close with the principal, Sister Ann Elizabeth. During her illness, and this is where the doubting Thomas comes into, during her illness, people would say to me, why don't we do a novena to St. John Newman? No, thank you. Let's do a novena to Catherine Drexel. No, thank you. Let's take her to St. John Newman Shrine. No, thank you. Let's take her to Catherine Drexel Shrine. No, thank you. Let's have the Padre Pio Association come over with his glove. No, thank you. I was really like, it's okay. Because, like Sister said, you read about miracles in the Bible. I taught miracles in my classroom. But whoever believes that a miracle is going to happen in your lifetime, in your house, not me. So I told everybody no. The Oblate Sisters constantly asking me, let's do a novena to our foundress, who at that time was Venerable Frances de Sales, Abiat. Now, that's okay. You want to pray? Be my guest. Mr. Mackenzie and I come from a very religious family. I had Sister Marie Corday was my aunt. I had my sister, who was an IHM sister. Mr. Mackenzie had three aunts who were religious sisters, 4 cousins who were priests. I had an uncle who was a priest. Not for anything, but our wedding day looked like a religious convention instead of a wedding because we had so many nuns and priests there. But I was not interested. And I kept saying, you know what, here's the thing. If God wants her cured, he'll cure her. I'm not praying to anybody. I called Sister Ann Elizabeth the evening that we got home with the devastating news that Bernadette was going to be bedridden. And she was equally upset. The next day, she left a message for me at St. Lawrence's asking to see me at the convent. So I went to see her. And she said, I know how you feel about praying novenas. I understand. But you're out of options. There is no place else to go but to God. And it is time to storm heaven. And we would like to do a novena to our foundress. And let's see what happens. She said, because right now, Bernadette's case is perfect for a miracle. Huh, I said. She said, no, really. She's on no medication. You have been told there's nothing more that they can do for her. Why don't we do a novena? Go home and talk to your husband, talk to Bernadette, and see what they say. So I said, okay. And she looked at me and she said, you're really saying yes? I said, I'm really saying yes. So I went home, spoke to Bernadette. Bernadette spoke to my husband, agreed that we would do this novena. On March 22nd of 1992, all of the Oblate sisters, at the time there were 14 in the United States, some stationed at St. Bernadette's in Upper Darby and Drexel Hill, and some stationed in Childs, Maryland. We all gathered in the convent chapel in St. Bernadette's Convent, along with our friends and our family members, and our parish priest, Father Sean Mahoney, and we began the novena to St. Leonie, to, at that time, Venerable Francis de Sales Aviat. I was the least believer in the chapel that night. And anybody who was there will tell you that I pretty much cried the entire 2 hours that we were there, because there's something very emotional about picking up a prayer card that says, for the complete and permanent cure of Bernadette Mackenzie. It was kind of like reality hit home. The 2 hours were over. Most of the people left the chapel. It was myself and the sisters. And as I was getting ready to leave, they all stopped me and said, you have to have faith. You have to have faith. Every one of them said to me, it will be okay. You have to have faith. Just continue to pray. There's prayer and there's faith. This girl still didn't have the faith. I will tell you that. I did pray. I prayed the novena prayer. Our family prayed the novena prayer. The next day, every child in school received the novena prayer, so that all of the families of St. Bernadette's were praying the prayer. The parishioners then received the prayer, the novena prayer, and the parish began to pray for Bernadette's cure. Father Sean Mahoney, who began the novena, was also chaplain at Bonner Prendy, and he read the novena prayer over the PA system every day for the students to pray. At St. Lawrence's, everybody at St. Lawrence's was saying the novena prayer. At the sister school in Childs, Maryland, Mount Aviat Academy, they were all saying the prayer. The Oblate fathers, who are down the road from the Oblate sisters, they were saying the prayer. So it was estimated that about 3,500 people were all praying for Bernadette's recovery at the same time. Still the least believer in the group. I had no expectations that this was going to work. None. Zero. Zilch. I only did it because I said I would. On March 24th, Bernadette had a doctor's appointment because after our visit on the 17th of March, the doctor ordered another MRI. And so we went back to Dr. Northrup's to have the results of the MRI given to us. Hadn't changed. Her spine had still retethered. And so he handed me all of her medical records to take to the next specialist. And he said, good luck, and let me know what happens. Okay. So the next day was March 25th, Feast of the Annunciation. I went off to work. My husband went off to work. Our other kids went off to school. At the time, my mother lived with us. She went to her favorite place, which was the casino, on a casino trip with my mother-in-law and my sister's mother-in-law. They were great friends, and they traveled all over. It was a rainy day, rainy, miserable, cold March day. I went into Bernadette, told her I was leaving. See you when we get home. That night in St. Bernadette's Parish, our women's club, of which I was president, was having a spring craft fair. Very large event. Always had 100, 150 women come. We would make spring crafts. So I decided to stop at St. Bernadette's afterwards, after work, to make sure the coffee urns were on and everything had been set up, etc. And while I was there checking on things, Sister Ann Elizabeth came down, wanted to know how things were. I said, okay. She said, you know, everybody's praying. I said, yeah, I know, everybody's praying. We chit-chatted, didn't have much to say. I left there, went home. Mr. Mackenzie got home about the same time, and we were kind of meandering up the sidewalk. And when we got to our front door, there was our daughter Bernadette. And I said to her, what are you doing out of bed? And she said, because I think it worked. And I said, what do you mean you think it worked? She said, I think the novena worked. Something happened. And I said, what happened? And she said, I don't have any pain in my back. And me, being the smart aleck mother that I am, I said, well, what did you take? And she went, Mom, nothing ever worked. You know that. It doesn't matter what they ever gave me. Nothing ever worked for my pain. My pain is gone. And besides, guess what else I can do? And I said, what? And she said, I can go up and down the steps, and it doesn't hurt. I can get in and out of the chair, and it doesn't hurt. I can run around the dining room table, and it doesn't hurt. She had not been able to do any of that for almost the 3 years that she was ill. So my husband and I looked at each other, and at our home in Drexel Hill, we had an enclosed porch that my husband used as his home office. So I said to her, let's go into the office. So into the office we went, and I said, Bernadette, tell me what happened. And she said, Mom, I don't know what happened. She said, I was so tired of being in my room, and I know I wasn't supposed to be on the steps, but I came downstairs, and I thought maybe if I sat in a different chair, that maybe my back would hurt less, maybe I would feel a little bit better. And so I came downstairs, and I was sitting in the chair, and I was doing my homework. I said, okay, and then? And she said, and then I don't know. I only know that 2 hours later, suddenly, I realized I had no pain in my back. And when I realized it didn't hurt to sit, I decided to stand up. So I stood up, and it didn't hurt to stand up. And when it didn't hurt to stand up, I decided to walk around the living room, and it didn't hurt to walk around the living room. And then I decided to walk quickly around the dining room table, and it didn't hurt to do that. Then I ran around the dining room table, and it didn't hurt to do that. So, by the way, if Mrs. Wallace, who was my next-door neighbor, said anything about strange people running around the dining room table, it was me. And then I went up and down the steps, and Mom, it doesn't hurt. Now, I have to tell you, when they asked us to pray the novena, they never told us what to do if it worked. And so my husband and I said to Bernadette, fine, I think you should go to bed. Bed? I have been in bed for 2.5 years, and you're sending me to bed? And I said, Bernadette, just go up to your room, because not for anything, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know who we were supposed to call. Do you call Ghostbusters? Because all of a sudden, she can do everything she couldn't do. She went up to bed, and then Mr. Mackenzie and I kind of sat there dumbfounded. Bernadette was wearing Leonie Aviat's relic around her neck, so she still had the relic. She was saying the novena. And now, this young lady who the day before could do nothing, who when for 2.5 years at the neurosurgeon's visit had no neurological functions. She had no reflexes. She couldn't lift her legs. She couldn't do this. It didn't matter what test Dr. Northrup would do with her every visit. She failed them all. And suddenly, she's up walking, running, and she has none of the pain that had debilitated her for 2.5 years. So we kind of sat there and looked at each other, And I knew I was going to see Sister Ann Elizabeth that night at the craft fair. So we decided we would tell her and see what she told us to do. In the meantime, I went up to Bernadette and I said, do you want your dinner here? Are you going to come down for dinner? Oh, I'm coming down for dinner. And we did not tell our other children what was going on. So we had dinner, and at the end of dinner, Bernadette says, I think I'd like to do the dishes after dinner. Now, I will tell you, I'm very big on giving children chores because it makes them responsible. And so my children have always had chores. And my children had taken up the slack for Bernadette's chore, or chores. And when she said she wanted to do the dishes, they got out of that kitchen so quick because now they didn't have to do her one chore. They were thrilled to death. But they never asked her why she wanted to do the dishes. When they left, I said to Bernadette, why do you want to do the dishes? And she said, because if I can load the dishwasher, wash up the pots and pans, if I can stand and do that, if I can bend and do that, then I know that this is really working. I said, okay. I'm not going to argue with you. We'll see what happens. Right before we left for the craft fair, my neighbor called and said she needed a babysitter because her husband got called to work. So I said, okay. My son, our oldest, was older than Bernadette, and I said, I'll send Michael over. And Bernadette said, no, I'll go. And I went, no, you can't go. It's pouring rain, and I'm thinking to myself, she's going to slip on that driveway and mess this whole thing up. So no, you can't go. But anyway, it turned out that she went. Went to the craft fair. Everybody's coming in. Just want you to know, Denise, we're praying. We're praying. We're praying. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, guess what? I think it worked. But I don't know who I'm allowed to tell that it worked. The sisters came in. I waited for everybody to stop chatting with them, and I went over and I said to Sister Ann Elizabeth, I have something to tell you. And I told her, and she said, okay, keep praying. No smile, no reaction, nothing. And I'm thinking to myself, I just told you that it seems like this Novena worked and you're not excited about it? Anyway, went home. Night was over, went home. And on her way out, Sister said, no smile, nothing, keep praying. Okay. And I got home and I said to my neighbor, I think I'm going to come in your house and I'm going to walk Bernadette home. I don't want her slipping on the driveway. And my neighbor kept saying, I can't believe Bernadette came over. And my neighbor didn't see her because her husband was leaving later. So it would have been her husband who saw Bernadette. So we got into my neighbor's back door and I said, Bernadette, we're home. And she comes running up my neighbor's basement steps. And my neighbor said to me, Denise, she just ran up my steps. I know, Rose. But she can't run. She can't even walk. And look it, she doesn't have any pain. I know, Rose. Are you trying to tell me? Yes, Rose. But don't say anything to anybody because I don't know what I'm supposed to say. In the meantime, Bernadette is trying to shut us up. And she finally said, I have something to tell you. And I said, what? She said, well, I did the dishes, and I was watering your plant, and I was praying the novena, and I said to God, I need a sign. You have to send me a sign that this is really working. And so the radio was on, and I asked God to put my graduation song on the radio. And I said, okay. And she said, Beauty and the Beast was playing. I said, okay. And she said, and the next song was my graduation song. And her graduation song was Forever Young, not by Rod Stewart, by this group called Alphaville, which I never heard until her graduation. I never heard after. And she said, so I screamed, and by the way, I killed your plant. And I jumped up and down, and Maureen and Michael and Danny came running to see what I was screaming about. And I told them, and Michael kept saying, but you can't jump up and down. And I can. Mom, I can do everything I need to do. Okay. So about an hour later, to bed she goes. Mr. Mackenzie and I go to bed. We did not sleep. How do you sleep with something like that? So we decided that the next morning we would go back to the convent. I would tell Sister Ann Elizabeth this next bit of news and see what she said. However, before I went, I woke Bernadette up and I said, I need you to do me a favor. What? I said, I need you to run up and down the stairs again. She said, what? I said, I need you to run up and down the stairs again. Remember me, Danny Thomas, least believer? I need you to run up and down the stairs again. She said to me, you want to make sure that this worked. I said, you're right, I do. So run up and down the steps. And she did, without any problem whatsoever. We went up to see Sister Ann Elizabeth, told her the latest. Now I got a big smile, and she said to me, continue to pray, but we'll take care of everything. And so that night I had 14 Oblate sisters in our living room. And at the time, the superior was a Sister John Marie. And she asked Bernadette what happened. And Bernadette relayed the story as she related to us. And she said to me, Mrs. Mackenzie, what is one thing that Bernadette always had to do in the doctor's office that she could never do? I said she could never raise her legs. And so Sister said, Bernadette, I want you to lay on the floor. So Bernadette laid on the floor. And she said, I want you to raise your legs. And she said, I can't without help. And she said, yes, you can. I want you to raise your legs. Now, if this was the examining table and these were her legs, for every visit when she would raise them, it would be maybe this much before the pain in her back started. But that night, her legs went straight up in the air. No pain, no problem. And when the sister saw that, that was it. The sister said, okay, now it begins. And so what began was the road to having Bernadette's quote-unquote cure declared a miracle. The first step was to have the doctor examine her. So I called Dr. Northrup for an appointment. We canceled the other specialist, by the way. And when I was speaking to him, I told him what had happened. I said, I just wanted to let you know that Bernadette has had a 360-degree change in her health. And he said, wow, I knew that surgeon was good, but I didn't think he was that good. And I went, oh no, do you remember when you saw Bernadette on the 24th of March, and she told you about the prayer that we were praying? And he said, I do. And I said, well, we think it worked. Dr. Northrup was always a man of very few words, and he didn't say anything for a few minutes. And then he said, I do believe some of my patients have been helped through the power of prayer. I said, well, I need you to examine her and then let me know what you think. He said, all right, come on in tomorrow morning. So the next morning, Bernadette and I went in, and he had a whole slew of doctors from Jefferson. The whole neurosurgery practice was there. One of the doctors that was there was a Dr. Bradley, who was also Father Bradley, who was also a doctor. And he said to Bernadette, all right, up on the examining table, and she hopped up on the table, and he did his entire neurological exam, all of which she passed with flying colors. And I said to him, well, what do you think? And he said, it's not anything that we did. And I said, okay. And he said, it had to be divine intervention. So I said, would you write that down for me? So he took his prescription pad and he wrote, there is no medical explanation for this patient's instant recovery. And I said, okay, well, now we need an MRI. Or Rome needs an MRI. So he called, he got an MRI scheduled immediately, and the MRI center for Jefferson was about 4 blocks away from Dr. Northrup's office. We walked there, no problem. Bernadette had her MRI. In the meantime, Bernadette and I started to write reports about her illness and her sudden escape from her illness. Then 2 weeks later, Sister Ann Elizabeth and I went to see Dr. Northrup, number 1, to get the results of her MRI, number 2, because we needed all of her medical records to send to Rome, every medical record. And when we sat before Dr. Northrup, I said, okay, we're ready, because when somebody has a miracle, tethered cord is gone. Except tethered cord was not gone. She still had a tethered spine. Her spine was still tethered to the base of her back. She still had all of these wild tethers and nerve endings. And now she had another issue. And the doctor explained that all of the spaces in between all of the disc in her spine were so highly inflamed. He said, not for anything, but she should be paralyzed. She should be in excruciating pain. And the fact that she is able to do what everybody else does, he said it has to be nothing but divine intervention. I do have to say, the sisters were a little disappointed that the tethered cord didn't go away, because that really helps with the miracle. But anyway, it did not, and so we sent everything to Rome, and 2 years later, we received word from Rome that they were assigning a priest to investigate Bernadette's cause, and we met with then Archbishop Bevilacqua. And then they convened what is called a tribunal, and 37 people who knew Bernadette before she was ill, while she was ill, after she was better, were called to testify as to the validity of before, during, and after. She also had to see doctors who were not Catholic, but who were experts in the field. We saw a Quaker, a doctor who was a Quaker, and we saw a doctor who was Jewish. The Jewish doctor, when we walked into his office, looked at Bernadette and said, no way. This is exactly what he said. No way. There is no way that the MRI that I just read belongs to you, because you should not be standing in front of me. You should be paralyzed. You should be in excruciating pain. So he interviewed her, and then he examined her. She passed with flying colors. Then we went to see the doctor who was a Quaker. And the very first thing he said to me was, by the way, I'm a Quaker and we don't believe in miracles. And I went, okay. So he examined Bernadette, and he got all finished his examination, and then he took out his keys. He said, oh, there's one more thing I want to do. And I said, oh, you want to check her Babinski? And he looked at me, he said, how do you know about that? I said, because my sister's a pediatric nurse. So I know all about the Babinski reflex. If you have a spinal injury, you don't have one. He did Bernadette's. She had a Babinski reflex. So I'm chuckling to myself because I'm thinking, okay, so right now we are disproving your theory. So then he interviewed Bernadette. And halfway through the interview, she stopped him and she said, wait a minute. You think I made it up. You think that this was all in my head, and that when I decided it was time, that I was tired of being home and bedridden, and I missed my friends, I would go back to school. And he said, well, I do have people who have psychosomatic illnesses and whatnot. And I thought Bernadette was really going to go across the table and take his, voice box out. She was so angry at him. And I finally said to him, Doctor, on March 24th, when she went to see Dr. Northrup, she had no neurological functions, or normal neurological functions. On the 31st of March, when she went back to see Dr. Northrup, she had full normal neurological functions. How do you explain that? He said, I can't. I said, neither can we, and we call that a miracle. And so he still didn't believe. 3 weeks later, he went to a medical conference in San Francisco, and he told Bernadette's story. And he told them how he reacted to it. And the two top doctors in the country on tethered cord came to him and said, you're wrong. There was no way this girl could be doing whatever she can and be fine, unless it was divine intervention. Anyway, the whole process took about 8.5 years. And as I said, in 2001, on November 25th, we attended the canonization of now St. Leonie Aviat due to the miracle that happened to our daughter Bernadette. So miracles do happen through prayer and through faith. And by the way, I don't have a problem with faith anymore. In the back, on your way out, there are pictures of Bernadette. She gave, during the canonization mass, she brought a gift up to the Holy Father. And because she was married 3 months prior to the canonization, they wanted the Pope to bless her marriage. So we had to bring her wedding gown to Rome. And there is a picture of her and her husband having their marriage blessed by the Pope. There is also a picture of St. Leonie Aviat. There's a picture of Bernadette and her husband and of her family. By the way, Bernadette is married and has 4 children, 3 boys and a little girl who is named Sister Anne Elizabeth Leonie, after Sister Anne Elizabeth and Leonie Aviat. There are newspaper articles from the newspaper in the Vatican. And when you go on a pilgrimage for a miracle or a beatification, they give you a scarf. And so the scarves that we wore for the beatification and for the canonization of Leonie Aviat are also there. And then you'll see this big, thick book. And the big, thick book is the testimony of everybody who testified at the tribunal that led to Bernadette's miracle being approved by the church and the canonization of St. Leonie Aviat. It was great to be here. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to pray. Don't forget to have faith, because you never know when a miracle is going to happen in your family. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette. We have a little gift to give to you, Denise, from all of us. Emma, if you could be so kind to give. Wasn't that, I'm thinking to myself, every time I hear this song, To Forever Young, I still think of this story and know that I can now say that faith does work. So in a couple minutes, Mrs. Denise McKenzie will be in the back. I'm going to invite Miss Valerie Ludovico now to just explain a couple details of the folders that you're going to receive in a couple minutes. So could you bear with me and let us give a round of applause to Denise and Valerie, okay? Okay, so Miss Ludovico is just going to hold this microphone like this, or you want me to hold it for you? Yeah, okay, all right, I'll do that.
All right, I will try to be as quickly, but I will try to be as quick as I can. If you are in the communion class, you will get a yellow folder. If you are in the confirmation class, it will be maroonish red. All right, some of the...
Try again.
Okay, did everybody hear that? Okay, if you're in the confirmation class, you're red. If you're in the communion class, you're yellow. There are some similarities. Both folders will have a brown envelope in it where you will put all the things that need to be returned to Sister. If you're in the communion class, the date is November 3rd. Confirmation is February 7th. Both folders will have a book of some sort about the sacrament that your child will be receiving. You will also have a white envelope for the fee that you need to return. You will have a schedule of all the events relating to your sacrament, such as retreats, practice days, and okay, I believe that's it. Now, there's differences. If you are in the first communion class, oh, wait a second, there is one other thing that will be the same. Both folders have a kit to make a rosary. That's the fun part of the day, which unfortunately you have to do at home due to COVID. But everything that you need to make your rosary will be in there, and Sister had asked that you be very careful at the end when you're putting the final stitches, knots on your rosary, because you don't want the rosary to fall apart as you're tying it together.
Because there's 3 holes in the middle part. You have to do all 3 holes. And there's extra rosaries if you ever want to make some extra ones and bring them in, and I'll take them and give them to the missions, okay?
All right, so here in the First Communion folder, we have a letter of the attire that you're going to be wearing that day, that your child needs. We have an information sheet to fill out. The formula for First Penance, which you need to practice at home. Of course, they'll be going over that in school and in your prep classes too. But if you practice it at home, that will make your child all the better at it. There's a little project where you will find a picture from your child's baptism. It can be a photograph or just something that you print off the internet. And you will put it on here and back it in construction paper, give it to sister, and they will be displayed in the narthex as the time gets closer. And, okay, I think that's it for communion. All right, a confirmation, you've got a little bit more. That goes there. Okay, in the confirmation folder, you have service projects to do. I think there's 3 of them. 2 of them? Okay. And then you also in there have a little, an orange sheet which gives some suggestions on things that you can do for the service projects. That's the, and then there's also a saint project that you need to do. So the directions are right there. There's information about, for sponsors, retreat, schedule for the retreat days when you need to be here, guidelines for sponsors, confirmation questions that they need to learn, and then there's a special project for parents to do, which I'm not going to say out loud because it's a little surprise for your child. And that's it. So they will be on the back tables.
And thank you, Ms. Ludovico. If you have any questions, again, you can see Ms. Ludovico or one of the teachers. And in conclusion, I'm going to ask Father Mike Gerlach to come up and do a special blessing. Father? All right, he's in the back there somewhere. Just while he's coming up, parents, if you could send to our parish the pictures of you making a rosary at home, we'd be thrilled to put that on the Facebook. So just send that to Jill Kirk. Our receptionist will be able to put that on the Facebook. So if you can see at home the fun part that you're going to do. And for the confirmation people, please be accurate with your record keeping too. If your sponsor needs an eligibility certificate, and that has to be gotten from a parish where your sponsor is registered. All right, so I know Father was going to say a final prayer, but I'll do it instead. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. We give God praise and thanks for this glorious day when we celebrate faith and family and fun. We ask that everyone continue to prepare and pray that miracles do happen. Saint Simon and Saint Jude, pray for us. Saint Leonie Aviat, pray for us. Saint Bernadette, pray for us. May Almighty God bless us all, and we pray in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. God bless you all. Thank you very much for coming. Again, Robert Francis is in the back. The people will be coming in for the next baptisms. Thank you.